Hello and welcome to the Resilient Life podcast. Resilient Life is the part of peakprosperity.com where we talk about practical and actionable solutions for tomorrow. Today we're meeting with Timo Marshall, co-founder of Spirit Works Distillery of Sebastopol, California. Timo and his wife Ashby co-founded one of the country's first 100% fully sourced and prepared organic distilleries. Why organic? Well, we'll get to that in just a moment with Timo. But more importantly, we want to talk about the science and practice of distilling alcohol. As something that to the average person is a bit of a black box, but it's something that humans have been practicing and enjoying for millennia. So without further ado, we're going to get into the discussion here with Timo to find out exactly how one goes about doing this, what the basic science is, what is legal and not legal to be able to do. But more importantly, we're going to enjoy the process of learning how man has found enjoyment in his cups. So Timo, thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Thanks for having me.
It's a real pleasure. And Timo, we live here in the same town. I've watched the journey of your business here. You've been open for how long now?
We started distilling in January 2013, so 5 years.
All right, and that's just, I've only been in Sebastopol slightly longer than that, but I remember your first products coming to the market here down in your tasting room, and I remember the town waiting eagerly for the next 3 years as your whiskey matured in its casks.
Everyone has to be patient for that side of things, even ourselves. Watching the whiskey rest in the back is definitely an art in patience for sure.
Well, from what I hear from the community, it really seems to have paid off in terms of how enjoyable people have found it. But I've been very impressed both with the quality of product that you and Ashby and your crew here have appeared to have come out with, but also that you've had I think a very clear vision for how you wanted to do this. I mentioned in the intro that your distillery is declared an organic distillery. Can you dive a little bit more into that? And as you do, maybe just give our listeners a bit of a quick history as to sort of your background and how you came to wanting to become a distiller in the first place.
Sure. Well, when we talk about being an organic distillery, we're not a certified organic distillery. That's important to know. But we are organic. I think it's more about a commitment to the process itself, and so we are a grain to glass facility. And what that means is that we start with whole grain, and then we mill, mash, and ferment that here on site. And that's the unusual part of this distillation process. I think that many of the distilleries that are out there will produce spirits in a slightly different way, and a lot of the spirits that you find out there are purchased in some way or other before they're manipulated to go into the bottle. But our process and the way that Ashby and I learned how to distill involves starting with whole grain. And our background is coming from working with environmental non-profits, and so we always knew that those ideals were going to be something that came through into our business as well. Organic is just a no-brainer. I mean, unless someone's been living in a cave for a while, why the benefits outweigh, why the pros outweigh the cons is are pretty obvious. But it's the reason why we chose that was more an environmental angle rather than anything else. There are other advantages that come from being organic. Of course, there is flavor, and there's texture, and there's all sorts of other aspects of spirits that are important with it being organic. But the main driving force for us was about the environment and sustainability in that sense.
All right, and I know when I saw that you were building yourselves as an organic distillery, it's something I'd never heard of before. Are there many other ones, or are you really a pioneer in this field?
It's nice of you to present us that way, but we are definitely not the first to be forging ahead with organic spirits. There are they're few and far between, that's for sure. But there's more and more coming on the scene all the time. The craft distilling movement in the US has gone crazy over the past few years, as we all know. Within California, that has changed tremendously. A few laws changed in the past few years, which has added an exponential growth factor to distilleries coming on the scene. And a lot of them are choosing to go down the organic route because they need to add a certain differentiation between themselves and other distilleries. So being organic is now being used as a marketing tool as well, obviously, which is interesting because for a while being organic was actually saying that on the bottle was actually detrimental to some industries like the wine industry, for example. That's changed now, of course. The perception being that you were paying more money for an organic wine than a conventional wine, and it might not even be as good. So the dollar is always going to speak louder in that sense in the general market.
Right. And do you find, I guess, what are the challenges to having a completely organic supply chain? Are you able to find enough product to buy? Are you constrained by product availability? Are there things that you need to do with the grains once you get it that are different because it's organic?
So when we first started distilling, we found it difficult to get hold of some of the malted grains, for example, as organic malted grains. And so, and that was a bit of a struggle, but some of our whiskey was produced with some of our original whiskey was produced with not necessarily organic malted barley, but just we had several prerequisites for all the raw materials that we were getting. They had to be, they had to hit some of numbers, organic being high up on the list, but also local, sustainable, non-GMO was a given, those sort of things. And for grain, that's a very different ballgame. When you talk about grain being local, it's such a massive industry that pretty much anything west of the Mississippi is local to us out here in Sebastopol. Yeah. That's how it's considered when you start dealing with a grain broker. And so, but we were able to find non-GMO barley right at the beginning when we first started, and we were experimenting with recipes and things. And then soon after that, we found a source for organic malted barley. So that worked out well for us. But it has been a struggle at times. It's the same with a lot of the botanicals that we put into our gin. You might be able to find local organic botanicals, but really the flavor profile that they produce is nothing like what we need in order to produce the spirits that we want to produce. So we had to go further afield for organic juniper, for example. And it's been difficult. But more and more members of the industry start cropping up, there's more and more demand for it. We find that a lot of those avenues are opening up for us.
All right, so let's get on to sort of the stars of the show here, which is the actual different alcoholic beverages or strains or products that you guys create. Yeah. You tell me how to refer to them as, but I know you do vodka. I know you do a couple variants of gin. We talked about whiskey a bit, so kind of let folks know what a distillery like yours, what are the main types of alcohol that they produce, and what's notable about each, maybe what differentiates a gin from a vodka, whatnot, and then we can get into the process of how to actually make them.
Sure. Most of the products that we make here, we make from grain. We can make products from fruit as well, but we make it from grain. So pretty much anything that can ferment is going to produce alcohol. And then that defines the type of alcohol. So, for example, if you... And I'm generalizing, there are other rules here as well, but essentially if you make something from grain, you're making a whiskey. If you make something from fruit, you're making a brandy. If you make something from sugar, molasses, that kind of thing, you're making a rum. If you make something from agave, you're essentially making well, tequila if you're out in tequila, but you're essentially making an agave spirit, that kind of thing, mezcal, tequila, those sort of things. So the raw material is really important to define the name that most of us hear. We hear, someone orders a brandy, and all that means is that it's a fruit-based
It's a fruit
distillate.
derived. Okay.
That's all that it means. And a whiskey is a grain-based distillate. So different types of whiskey will then be different types of grain. So a bourbon, for example, is a majority of that grain has to be corn. We make a straight rye whiskey here at Spirit Works, and so majority of that base has to be rye. The same, we make a wheat whiskey, and the same has to be wheat. And so depending on those, on what the base is going to define what the final spirit is for those sort of spirits. Mm-hmm. Then there are a whole group of spirits that are produced from a base of alcohol. And that sounds funny, but you can take any of those, whiskey, brandy, rum, whatever. They're all particular types of spirits that are being produced from a raw material, but you can take any of those and clean the alcohol itself, the ethanol itself, out of those spirits and create what we call a neutral spirit. And from that neutral spirit, you can make things like gin and aquavit and other spirits where you're just adding flavors or botanicals to that pure ethanol.
That pure ethanol.
Yeah.
Got it.
So on that, I've made all that way more complicated than it should
Actually,
be.
no, I actually thought you were pretty clear with it. Yeah, it's helpful.
Okay. Essentially, you can produce ethanol from anything, and that's a very clean alcohol. So that's what we do here. We take grain, we mill it and mash it, which essentially means that we're breaking it down and cooking it in water. And it's an enzymatic process too, so we add enzymes that saccharification enzymes, which will turn the starch in those grains into sugar, and then and we add water and yeast, and it just starts fermenting. It's essentially producing a type of beer, but without the hops, of course, without any of that flavor attached to it, of that aspect. And then once that has fermented over time, it has produced alcohol. So whatever, 10, 11, 12, 13% alcohol. All we're interested in is that alcohol. The rest of what is in that mash to us is waste stream for us. And so we will put that mash through our still, and we will clean out or extract just that pure ethanol itself. And then that becomes the base for the products that we're going to make.
Great. And we're talking here, we're actually in the Spirit Works Distillery. We're upstairs, but I can look outside the window of the office we're in here and see the gleaming copper still that's used for what Timo was just describing. When you talked about kind of cleaning the alcohol and concentrating it, can you just talk a little bit about the science behind what happens in the still during that process?
Sure.
It's really evaporation and condensation, right? Recondensation.
Yeah. If you imagine you take a pot of water and put it on a stove, and turn the flame up, turn the heat on underneath, that pot of water will get up to 100 degrees, ideal in centigrade because it makes sense. And so,
and because you're originally from England.
No, but primarily because it makes sense. So you get up to 100 degrees and the water will start boiling, right? The reason why it's boiling at 100 degrees is because that's the property of the water. It'll start boiling at 100 degrees. Boiling just means that it is changing its state. So it's changing from a liquid state into a vapor state. And in this case, because it's water, the vapor, we refer to it as steam. So we see it boiling. Do you know how hot the flame is under that pot?
No.
Because it doesn't matter. There's no relevance to the flame. Because the property of the water is 100 degrees. It will always boil at 100 degrees. Given normal atmospheric conditions. Of course, if you go to the top of Everest and atmosphere changes, it will boil at lower temperature, etc. Those sort of things change. But given normal conditions, it will always boil at 100 degrees. If you turn that flame up, it will still be 100 degrees, but it will just boil with more energy. If you turn that flame right down, it will simmer. So most liquids will have a boiling point all liquids will have a boiling point in that way. And so alcohol, ethanol, which is what we're interested in, will boil at 78 degrees, for example. So that means that if you have ethanol in a pot and you add flame underneath, it'll start boiling. And the temperature of that liquid in there will be 78 degrees. And then it will it will boil, and so it will turn into vapor. And we don't call it steam, we call it vapor at that point. And essentially, if that alcohol was in water, so in the mash, in that situation, and we added heat to it, when that liquid gets to 78 degrees, the alcohol is turning into vapor. It's coming off it. The water that it's contained in, that it's mixed with, is merely warm.
Will stay a liquid.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
It's not boiling. It doesn't want to boil because that's not its property. And so what that means is you now have this vapor of alcohol coming off it, which is now separated from the water. You condense that, you force that vapor to go through something colder than itself, so a tube that is surrounded by cold water or something like that. It'll condense onto the side of that tube, drip down to the bottom, you collect it, and you now have clean alcohol.
Clean 100% ethanol, liquid ethanol.
Well, you have alcohol, which is separated from water. There are different types of alcohol.
Oh, God, okay.
So you have, and you may have a mixture of those different types of alcohol in there. But essentially you have alcohol that is cleaner from water than the stuff that you had in the still.
Got it, because you have any kind of alcohol that will vaporize at 78 degrees.
The ethanol is one example which will boil at 78 degrees, but there's like methanol, for example, is another type of alcohol which will boil at a lower right. degree. It's more volatile. I think, I'm not sure exactly what that temperature is. I think it's somewhere, I think it can even start becoming volatilized at room temperature in some situations. Wow. But and methanol, of course, is one of the aspects of alcohol that is really hard for the body to process. In fact, too much methanol will harm you. I mean, any alcohol, too much of it will harm you. But methanol in particular can make you go blind, for example. That's where those expressions, blind drunk, come right. from. And drinking too much moonshine will make you go blind. Methanol smells like nail polish remover and Sharpies, acetone. Oh. And I really like the smell of it, but it's really bad for you. Don't like the smell of it. That's like lesson number one. Try not to like it.
All right, but getting back to your example there, so we've separated the ethanol from the water. In that ethanol vapor that we've then condensed, we cleaned it from the water, but it still has some of those other alcohols in it, like methanol. So you've got alcohol there, but you still probably want to refine it further to get to that ethanol concentration you want, right?
That mixture we refer to as low wines. I don't know why that's like a traditional name that distilleries have given that first distillate. Okay. Also, we've just stripped it out of that mash, and so we call that a stripping run. Okay. The waste. I just want to briefly talk about the waste at our distillery. Of course, you've got all that water and the rest of all the grain that in the mash is still there, and is no longer has alcohol in it, so it's not useful to us. We put that into containers that's picked up by a local pig farmer, and he feeds it to his pigs. We get bacon in return every now and again, so it all works out well. We're happy, the pigs are happy for a while, and the farmer's happy too.
That's great, though. It certainly comports with your brand, sort of the founding elements of your mission, sustainability and whatnot. And, I always say someone's waste is someone else's treasure, and certainly the pigs, I'm sure, feel that way. And when you get the bacon back, I'm sure you feel the same way.
Yeah, it all works out really well. But there's a business side to that as well, sure. Because we don't then have to process that waste into the waste management system that is by the city of Santa Rosa, and so or put it down the drain. So the water and sewage people of Santa Rosa, the city of Santa Rosa, they're really happy with us. There's no waste management system that we have to work with or pay for or get permits for. It all works out really, really well. from a business standpoint.
All right, fantastic.
So that's the first step. Once we have that alcohol, we have a still, which is a hybrid still. It can do many different things, but one aspect of our still is called a rectification column. It's a very tall piece of equipment that has various stages to it. And what that does is when we redistill the low wines, that means we put it back into the pot still and redistill it. We send that vapor through a rectification column, which allows us to separate those different types of alcohol that I was talking about before. So we're able to really concentrate the methanol, the heads side of it, and we are able to cut those out of the final stream of product. And so then we're able to collect just the hearts of a distillation run, which is essentially just very, very clean, pure ethanol. In fact, it's so clean that when it comes out of the still, we collect it at 96% ethanol,
wow.
4% other things. Yeah.
All right, so now you have that almost 100% pure ethanol. How do you use it to make your, I forgot how you refer to them, but the spirits that are basically ethanol based?
Yeah, we refer to them as white spirits in-house, but there's various ways of looking at them. Essentially, what you now have is a very clean ethanol. You can add flavor to that in various different ways. We make a gin here at Spirit Works Distillery, so a gin is predominantly a juniper flavor and character. That's the idea of it. And so we put that ethanol back in the still. We add water to it because 96% pure ethanol is actually pretty volatile. So we add water to it. And then we add various botanicals to it, of which juniper is the main component. But we add angelica and orris root as well. Angelica is part of the fennel family, actually, interestingly. It's really interesting flavor and smell. We add these like grassy earth notes in the way of from that fennel and from that orris. For spices, we add cardamom and coriander. We add a hibiscus flower as our floral component, and these are all quite normal things in gin. The hibiscus maybe is a little bit different, but some people will add rose or lavender. And there's always a citrus component to gin, and so we add fresh orange and lemon zest as well to our gin. All of that stuff goes into the alcohol. We distill it again, and that distillation process, as that ethanol boils again, it will actually grab a lot of the flavor from the essential oils, from the oils of the various botanicals that we put in there, and we'll bring those flavor and the perfume and the smell from those various components across with it. And once it condenses, that's our gin.
Okay, and it unlike something like a whiskey, when you prepare it, it has to age for a long period of time. You know, whiskey's case, I believe, years. With these white spirits that you're talking about, where you're infusing them with things like juniper and fennel and whatnot, does it need to sit for a long period of time, or is it something you make relatively quickly?
No, they're done. When they come off the still, they're done.
Okay.
Things that come off the still are relatively high proof generally, and so they're always proof down is the phrase. You add water to it to bring it back to a normal percentage spirit. So like most spirits, they all have to be over 40% in the US. Vodkas, gins, whiskies, any spirits actually, but they can range. They can be up to whatever you want them to be. So they're proof down with a little water, but essentially they're ready to go when they come off the still.
Okay.
When you add water, you have to let them sit for a while and attenuate. The alcohol and the water have to bond and mix and marry is the expression.
And what do you mean by a while, ballpark?
You can put it in bottles straight away,
weeks?
but a week maybe.
Okay.
Is probably a good amount of time for that.
Okay. And then you guys make before I go there, so you guys also make something called sloe gin.
Yeah.
Which I don't think too many Americans are aware of. I think it's more of a British type of gin, but it's wonderful.
So it is definitely traditional British tipple, but it's actually a liqueur. You have to think of it as a plum liqueur. The sloe berry itself, which grows on the blackthorn bush, is a wild plum. It's a drupe. So the drupe itself it's a stone fruit. The plum looks like a blueberry. I mean, this sloe berry is like a little blueberry. It's very sour. It's very tart. And in England, it was planted for centuries around the fields as a hedge. In the days before barbed wire, it was very useful to keep animals out and your dodgy neighbours and anyone else coming to steal your cabbages and carrots. And so, at the end of harvest, at the end of summer, once the work was done in the fields, this blackthorn bush would produce this fruit, and no one really knew what to do with it back in the day. I mean, I guess they had some use for it, but it really wasn't very edible. But to its bounty and to preserve it, people added it to alcohol. Way back in the day, they added it to cider and produced a drink called Slider, which delicious, of course. But then One Bright Spark added it to gin, and we've never looked back. It lends itself so well to those botanicals. But it's a true liqueur, so just adding it to gin by itself is still it's too sour to enjoy. So you have to add sugar to it as well. We add organic cane sugar to it, and that produces a true liqueur.
All right, and is that liqueur added after you've gone through the regular gin production cycle?
Yeah, so we have to make that base spirit first. Then from that base spirit, we make gin. Then from that gin, we can either put it in bottle or we can add fruit to it and make slow gin.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. All right, so you've got gin, slow gin. You guys make vodka as well.
So vodka is just pure ethanol. Oh. That's all it is, ethanol and water. That's the idea behind it. And so...
so it's sort of the easiest thing for you to make.
Well, it's the first thing.
Yeah.
When we make clean base, we can literally just proof that down and put that in bottle, and that's our vodka.
So is it correct to think that gin is basically just vodka with a little extra attention given to it?
With another, gin is essentially a redistilled vodka with the appropriate flavor things in it.
Okay, great.
Someone was, I think it was Rachel Maddow, was asked if she enjoyed flavored vodkas, and she said, yes, gin.
Okay, well, sounds like she's accurate in that answer.
It was something like that. I'm paraphrasing horribly, but it was the conversation was something like that.
All right, and then the other major product that you guys create here, and if there's others, let me know, but is the whiskey, which we've referenced a couple of times before. Just talk a little bit about how that differs from the whole process you just walked us through here.
Sure. The process that I just talked about all starts before, in part of its process to go into the bottle, it has to be very, very clean ethanol. That's the idea behind it. In fact, legally, you have to distill that base to over 95% at some point in the process. With whiskey, you are not allowed to distill it that clean. In fact, legally, it can't go over 80% in the distillation. So it's hard to understand that until you think of it visually. 80% of that glass is ethanol, and 20% of it has to be something else. Mm-hmm. So that something else is water that comes across, and other alcohols, and flavors and characters and other things that come over from that initial mash that you're going to make the whiskey from. So it has way, way, way more character than the vodka, which is 95% ethanol and only 5% of that flavor.
Got it. Makes sense. Yeah.
So that's the difference. Whiskey has a lot more flavor and character coming over from the still. When whiskey comes off the still, it's clear. It's as clear as the vodka is. There's no color in it. There's no character to the liquid itself, visually. So at that point, it's referred to as White Dog, Moonshine, New Make. It has various names, White Lightning, in the US because people seem to really enjoy it out here. However, some of those other components in that 20% are flavors that not everyone really enjoys. They prefer something a little bit cleaner and a little bit rounder. It can be quite harsh. And to do that, people put it in barrel. The barrel maturation process does many things to that whiskey, but it softens it for sure. It makes it a much rounder mouthfeel, and it imparts color and it imparts flavor from the barrel, which in a lot of cases has sweet components, which makes it that much easier to drink.
Okay. And when you say it softens, what is the wood doing to soften it?
So maturation is all about the interaction of the liquid and the wood itself. And so within the wood, there are various components from the type of plant that it was before. The type of wood that we use and most American-style whiskeys use is American white oak. Quercus alba is the type of wood. And within it, there are certain literally components that are specific to that type of wood, which get extracted by the alcohol and kept in the alcohol. So there are some lanolins, for example, within the cell structure. There's one in particular within Quercus alba that is called a vanillin. And vanillin has the property of tasting very much like vanilla.
Like vanilla. Yeah.
So when you store new make or whiskey in a barrel, after a while it's grabbed quite a lot of vanilla flavor out of American white oak. There's similar components, if not the same component, in other types of oak as well, but at different quantities. There are other flavor components that the whiskey is going to grab from the oak as well. Toasted coconut, butterscotch, caramels, these sort of sweetened components, as well as some of the tanniny, wooden, smoky, those sort of flavors as well. The inside of the barrel itself that we use is burnt. It's literally burnt. It looks like charcoal, the inside of it. And they're burnt as the inside of the barrels are burnt as they're put together. That does several things, but it also acts as a filter as the liquid moves in and out of the wood. It's
like charcoal. I mean, charcoal is great for filtering.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes an organic filter in that way. But also the burning of the wood creates other esters and other flavors profiles that are going to be added to that whiskey. Why all this is done? There are so many theories, of course, from back in the day. Everything used to be transported in barrels, so someone would send sardines out to the Midwest in a barrel, and then when they got that barrel, they wanted to use it to send whiskey back, and they didn't want the sardine flavor, so they burned the inside of the barrel to take that flavor off, fill it with whiskey. And then after a while, everyone out on the East Coast was like, we want the whiskey that came in those barrels again. So, because it would take that long to get back to the East Coast as well, so it would age in the barrel as it went along. There are so many stories like that as to how that barrel aging came along. It's also a legal requirement for a lot of whiskies to be put into a brand new charred oak barrel. Like, where did that law come from? And there's a lot of people talking about lumber barons who were involved in politics at the time. And so there's a lot of components like that.
From the barrel burning union too, I'm sure.
I'm sure. Yeah. There are other aspects as to what happens in maturation for a barrel that are really fascinating to me. There's a certain amount of osmosis that happens. You've got a movement of components from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration through a semi-permeable membrane, which is in this case is the wood. And so if you have, that all sounded complicated, but essentially what that means is that if the space around that barrel is humid, if there's water in that space, then alcohol will want to move from inside the barrel to outside the barrel, will evaporate in an effort to balance the two, right? Which is essentially what osmosis is doing. But if it's essentially very dry outside the barrel, then it's not alcohol that will leave the barrel, it'll be water that leaves the barrel. So what is around the barrel can also affect it in that way. There is oxygen that can move through you get an oxidation of the alcohol within within the barrel as well. Not of the alcohol, of the whiskey itself. Actually, oxidation happens more when there's more water inside the barrel than less, which is interesting. You also, those are the main components, and then how that whiskey moves in and out of the wood can happen for various reasons. For all those, osmosis and just the very fact that wood is cellular, and so there's capillary action that draws liquid into the wood just by itself. But there's also temperature. So as you add heat to the environment that barrel is in, the liquid inside the barrel will expand, push into the wood, and then as it cools, it will leave the wood and come back. And so a lot of subtraction and extraction happens during that time.
It sounds so incredibly complex because there's so many variables.
But it's so fascinating.
Well, it is.
It's
and one of the things that I first heard with you guys, I don't even know if anybody else is doing it, but I know that you guys are always kind of cooking up new ways to mix these different variables together to see what it produces. And I know one of the tests that you guys did with some of your whiskey was to experiment with sound and actually play certain music to some of your barrels to see if being exposed to sound waves over a period of time influence the aging process.
Yeah, that was really a bit of fun at the beginning because we could, I think we're a small craft distillery and so we're able to do that. But yeah, essentially we wanted to see if we could excite that boundary between the liquid and the wood itself. We wanted to excite it somehow, and we thought, why not vibrate it and do it physically using physical sound waves to vibrate that liquid or the wood, which way you want to look at it. And so putting a couple of speakers on the back of a barrel and pumping music into it was in an effort to just pump sound waves into it. But at the same time, having a bit of fun because it was music as opposed to just a set of beats.
Yeah. What did you determine whether it made a difference or not?
Every time we make a batch of whiskey, we do it batch by batch. So we start with 1 ton of grain, 2,000 pounds, and that essentially produces just over 2 barrels and a bit of whiskey. A barrel being 53 gallons in size, and so we took 2 barrels and we added from the same batch, and we added music to one and left the other one without as the control to see if there was going to be a big difference. It's a hard experiment to really quantify because the results are subjective, and that's the first thing. And they'll say, and the second thing I'll say is that each barrel is like a snowflake, and so there is a difference from one barrel to the next anyway, whatever happens. But we did a bunch of blind tasting with some. We didn't just have one music barrel either. We have several different music barrels with different genres and things going on. It was really good fun putting that together. We still do it. We still have some barrels out in the back to do it. But after our first set of barrels had been listening to music for 3 years, 24/7 for 3 years, we did a bunch of blind tasting with several of our customers here in Sebastopol, and they definitely found differences between the different whiskies. And then they were asked which one they thought was the music barrel. Now here's where it gets interesting to me. I know that there's a difference between the barrels. Sure, there is a difference. But then most of the people got it right as to which one had the music.
That's interesting.
So how do you assign what you think the music is going to do to a barrel to what you're tasting? It's really interesting. That aspect is really interesting. But yeah, it was a difference. It's a bit of fun.
Was there a genre that was preferred amongst the ones that were music exposed?
So I played bluegrass to the first barrel, Americana bluegrass, and Ashby picked a barrel. And she and I go every year to see the Nutcracker in San Francisco. It's a very American thing, by the way, and I love it. We go every year. So we put the San Francisco Philharmonic Orchestra playing the Nutcracker on another barrel, and that one we've only released those two, and that one has been the favorite.
Okay, I remember hearing at some point somewhere about a barrel that was getting a bunch of Bob Marley
Yeah, I mean, we have every genre out there. I'm not sure about a reggae barrel, actually. I think that might just be a rumor.
Oh, is that just
We definitely have, like, Led Zeppelin. We have a tribute barrel to Prince and Michael Jackson. We have a dance, like a barrel that's just dance music from the Bay Area hip-hop. And, yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
Ah, that's so cool. Well, Timo, just in wrapping up here, you've given, I think, just such great insight into the process. You're clearly a master of your craft here, so thank you for sharing your knowledge with us.
Yeah.
Now, you did mention to me right as we were sitting up here that, unlike home brewing, home distillery is something that is generally frowned upon by the law system here in the States. Can you just comment on that briefly?
Yeah, it's difficult to learn how to distill in the United States because it's illegal to distill spirits for any use in the U.S. It's a federal law. It's a felony in the eyes of the federal.
Wow. And so what do you need? Do you need some sort of license or?
Yeah, so in order to distill, you need to go and sign up with them and get a license for your still. But then that starts involving a huge number of other issues, because then you need a space, and then the local building inspector gets involved, and the city has to issue you a license, and then your state has to issue you a license. It becomes very, very complicated to distill. If you want to learn how to distill in the US, there are ways to do it now. It was very, very hard when Ashley and I were learning, but there are now some courses that can be done as part of fermentation and brewing courses at a couple of different universities, distillation being one branch of it. Mm-hmm. There are many distilleries that do workshops so you can go and learn distillation 101 kind of thing.
Great.
From scratch, and then you can progress through that process. There are a couple of organizations in the US. The ADI, or American Distilling Institute, is one that has an amazing forum to answer all sorts of questions and for people to get involved in that way. The other one is the ACSA, American Craft Spirits Association, which is more of a lobbying side of things, but also a great resource for knowledge.
Great. And that was the American what association?
American Craft Spirits Association.
Craft Spirits?
Craft Spirits.
Sorry, Craft Spirits.
Yeah, sorry. My accent. Craft
in there,
Spirits Association. The ADI, though, American Distilling Institute, their forum is pretty extensive. It's a good place to start. In countries where it is legal to home distill, like New Zealand, for example, they have some great forums as well for people that are just interested in what that would look like if it was legal in this country.
Great. Well, thank you, and for Peak Prosperity listeners here, we've long had discussions on the site that if we ever got into a situation where the truck stopped running for a little while, if you were one of the few folks in your area that knew how to create and produce alcohol, you'd clearly have a value proposition there that would definitely have some real clout in any sort of barter type environment. So anyways, Timo's just given us a lot of resources to go look at for anybody who wants to learn how to potentially develop some of these skills on the side. And with that, Timo, I'm going to say thank you again so much for sharing your expertise here with us. And a reminder to those who are listening who are coming to the Peak Prosperity Seminar in early May this year, we're going to be arranging a private tour of the Spirit Works Distillery for anybody that wants to go to that. So you'll be able to come here and see the beautiful still and actually sort of see the science here in action, and obviously get to taste the great product and take some home with you if you like. And for those who are not going to be coming to that seminar, Timo, but want to learn more about Spirit Works Distillery, where can they go?
Our website, spiritworksdistillery.com, is a good place to start. And our Facebook page as well. And also just reach out to us if things come up that you are curious about, questions that you might have that I haven't necessarily touched on in this as well. Just reach out to us.
No, that's very kind of you. And your product, is it generally available anywhere in the U.S.? Is it regional at this point?
At this point, we're covered in California, Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, and Oregon. We're looking to open up the East Coast this year, actually. So we're looking at New York, Florida, Washington, D.C., I think.
Great. And if somebody lives in one of those areas where you haven't quite opened up yet and they come to your website and are interested in your product, can they special order it, or do they have to wait until a distributor in their area picks it up?
On our webpage, there is a place that will point you at some online retail stores that will be able to sell your product. We're not allowed to. Mm-hmm. Being a manufacturer, that's the other thing we didn't even touch on, but this is a 3-tier system in this country, and so we're not allowed to sell direct to consumer unless it's out of our tasting room in person. So we're not allowed to ship products to anyone else. But there are lots of other retailers out there that can.
Okay, so basically the general audience listening can, through one way or another, find a way to get your product through. Excellent. Well, Timo, with that, thanks so much, and look forward to seeing you again in May.
Awesome. Thank you, man.